It's great to see you all. It's great to have you all here. I think we're in the midst of launching into an exciting new conversation. Right? For me, this marks my kind of 1 year into the job. I've taken some time over the course of the summer to think back about where we have been over the course of the last year, and also we have a lot of the structures and resources in place to actually really define aggressively where we're going. As Mitch said, and as several of you who just came from the lunch with Steve Lerman know well, this is also a time that really dovetails nicely with an incredibly exciting moment for the university as a whole. So this isn't just about our moment and our strategic plan, but it's also the fact that the moment that the university is very much feeling like it has all of the pieces in place to actually aggressively do what it is that we plan to do. That doesn't just include 5 new deans in the last year, a new provost in the last year, a new vice president for development and alumni relations in the last year and a half. All of these pieces are lined up in a way that now that we're standing at the front of a capital campaign, I think it is palpable for everybody that these next 10 years are going to be the most exciting, not just for the business school, but for the university as a whole. And it is truly a moment. I believe Russ Ramsey now, when I see him stand up and say, my aspiration is for nothing less than this to be one of the most admired universities in the world. And that's why I came. I came here to be part of that process. And believe me, I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have come here if I didn't believe in that on some level. Now, as many of you know, over the course of the last year, there were some startling things that always happen when you're a new dean, and as you sort of pull back the curtain on things and try to actually understand what's going on, where you've been, where you're going, do you have the resources to go where you need to go, is the culture, organizational structure, and culture right? A lot of things require change, they require aggressive movement, they require reorganization. And so what I wanted to do today is actually kind of give you a sense of where we are and where we're going and how these things are set in place. Now, I typically like to do these things much more as conversations, but this time, and I've done this before, so I apologize for it, but this time I thought I'd actually give this a little bit more structure and put together a presentation. Some of it is going to feel like a little bit of old hat to some of you because you've seen some of this before, although there's some new stuff in here as well. But part of that reason is that it also dovetails with what is the newly emerging structure and practice for this board, right? So we have the organization as a whole, we have GWSB as a smaller organization within that structure, and we have this board as a small organization. And for those of you who were in the last board meeting, we spent most of that time talking about how do we actually reconstitute or rethink what this board is really going to be about as we launch into this next important phase of what we're doing developmentally. And so just the quick cliff notes of that, if you haven't had time to sit down and really read this new document that you all just approved. I know that happens sometimes. But the quick 2-point footnote or cliff note there is that what we're trying to do is first really expand who we are as a group. Right? I don't want this to be an exclusive club. I want this to have as much reach and as much excitement for the general community that are GWSB alums and parents and people that are actually a part of what we do as a whole. So to my mind, I don't think we gain anything by being an exclusive club. I do still need an executive group that kind of thinks deeply and is a little more present for me and is a group of people that I can sort of rely on and pick up the phone and call and I'm in more direct contact with. But that's actually, I think, a self-selection process can emerge in which we all kind of come together in a natural flow of things where we have a group of people like you all. There may be some people who aren't here who are going to continue to be a part of that group as well. But also we have a more expansive audience and a more expansive group. Now, part of the reason for that, remember, is that as we launch into this campaign, we had a long discussion last time about something that has been on the table. Several have been raising it for years. Howard has been a big advocate of this. Not just asking this board specifically to dig deeper. That's really not what this conversation is about at this point. What this conversation is about actually leveraging you all as evangelists for the school and as people who can, each of you, build your own networks and become conduits for me to actually have much more access, much larger access, a greater breadth of access, even deeper access to people in communities that we're not really touching right now. Right? We're sitting on, there's a lot of people who have actually been recovered in the new, or kind of uncovered in the new capital campaign analysis that has come from the consulting firm that we used. And so there's a huge opportunity for us to actually get in front of those people and have time to actually go much deeper with a much broader group of people. So what I want to do today is tell the story of the school one more time to you so that you're equipped when you go out there and you're feeling comfortable with what it is that we're doing. Now, hopefully by now, for those of you who have been hearing me over the course of the last year, you can get up here and do this yourselves, but maybe not yet. By the way, one of the things you'll notice that we're filming this event, we tend to, if you haven't spent time checking out the Dean's blog and you're ever just wondering, where can I get a snippet of the story? I tend to use the blog not as a written, interactive document, but instead as a video type of document. So you can find many, I don't know, Donnie, maybe like how many? 20, 30 of these kinds of talks that actually tell the story of the school in different moments to different audiences and different times. So if you're ever wondering where you can actually just find a 2-minute version of what it is, you should go on there, click, they're all cached there and you can find them. Okay? Now, before we actually dive in to what it is that is the specific thing that we're doing over the course of the last year and where we're launching to now, I want to just take a second to detail this from a conceptual thing. I didn't actually come up with this, but I came across it. It was a very nice TED Talk by a guy named Simon Sinek. Maybe some of you have seen it. But I think it's a very, very nice way of organizing a couple of core concepts of who we are and what we do. So if you think about, and this applies to any organization, not just a business school, but it applies to any company, almost all organizations have a good sense of what they do, right? Whether you are making computers, or you're delivering MBAs for students, or you're out as a consulting firm advising companies on how to be successful, the what of what business is, almost all companies nail down, right? Now there's a second layer of questions that companies often think about, which is a strategic question. How do we do that? Right? How do we create a competitive advantage in the marketplace? How do we leverage the resources available to us so that we can actually win that business? Right? We can sell more computers, sell more business and consulting, deliver better MBAs. Right? A few companies get to the point of asking the question of why we do what we do. I think you'll find as you go deeper in these concentric circles, people ask the questions less and less. I would argue that the companies that are most successful that you know about have a good sense of what their purpose is. Right? And a lot of people in the organization can talk about that purpose and they can have a deep sort of understanding of what that purpose is. The interesting thing about how companies process these issues is they typically process them the way I just described this, right? You come up with a product, you think, how can I actually sell this product better than my competitors? And maybe if you get to the point of thinking, why are we doing this anyway? Right? What is it? Are we trying to do it for increasing shareholder value? Do we have some deeper purpose? But as we get here, this is sort of the fluffy stuff, right? I believe, and I think some other people who talk and think a lot about purpose, there's actually a lot of good stuff going on in this in companies like Landor and a number of other places where people are really helping companies think through a branding around purpose. I think the best companies that you know about probably analyze their world in the opposite direction. Right? So if you think of a company like Apple Computer, right? Is that a computer company? I don't think Steve Jobs would have ever said that, right? And in fact, they're driving the computer business, the computer as an artifact out of business because that's not really what they do. What they really do is create innovative experiences for people to have a great interactive model of how to live in a high-tech world, right? And so if you look at what happened when Steve Jobs came back to Apple in 1996, he didn't really even focus on what was languishing at Apple Computer. He said, actually, we need an entire new model that's a different set of products that led to what the MP3 wasn't delivering very well, and next you have the iPad, or the iPod, and the iPad, and iTunes, and the cloud computing. And so it's an entirely different model. Similar with IBM. IBM almost died as a company because it was so focused in its early years, well, not its early years, but up until the year when Gerstner took over, on mainframe computing, right? They completely missed the computer revolution. But what Gerstner helped them do was think, actually, we should always be thinking about what the next thing that we're doing is, because what is the heart and soul of what we do is we make people's lives better in organizations. We're not a computer company. We are actually a company that makes people's lives more efficient within organizations, right? And that led them into software, and then that led them into consulting and advising, and their entire business model is constantly changing as a result of that. Now, this is the way that I want to think of what we do as well, right? I want us first, especially if we're all going to go out and continue to be evangelists for the school, we have to be able to answer the question of why we're doing what we're doing. Anyone want to take a shot? Howard?
Educating future leaders.
That's what we're doing. Why are we doing this? Why am I here? Bill?
I'm here because I care about the university, and I care about the university and its mission.
And what is that mission?
The mission is to educate young people.
Okay. So we're educating young people. Mitch, why are we here?
Make a difference, help the world be a better place.
Okay.
Say create and propagate knowledge.
Create and propagate knowledge.
In a similar vein, sort of help the next generation move forward in helping the world stay or become a better place.
Okay, so similar to Mitch's, but focusing on the next generation, but education to make the world a better place, Steve?
I just have absolute conviction in the product.
Okay.
And I get a chance to see Bill Quinn wearing a necktie.
So I'll tell you very quickly, because and the reason this is an important thing, so I have two vice deans. They're both the best people that can be in that job. I would not be able to do what I'm doing today without them. If you don't know them, you should get to know them. Marat Tarimtalar and Sokyon Khan are so important to this school. And I asked this of both of them. I said, why are we doing what we're doing? And one of them said, we want to be a top 20 school. Right? And my response was, I say that too much, don't I? Because for me, that's of course important. And our alums care, and our future students depend on it. That is not why we're doing what we're doing. Right? That is hopefully an ancillary effect of what if we do what we do well. But I'm with Mitch on this. I am here because I want to change the world. Right? Or at the very least, change the way that business school education is done to have a positive impact on training future leaders of the world. Right? I want to make a difference, and I want that difference to be so real and so powerful that it's not just rhetoric, but it's actually about making the world a better place. Right? Now, so to me, that's really, really important. I believe in that. I believe deeply in it. If you don't believe in it, we should talk about what you do believe in and what you feel about it. But that's, for me, core to who I am. Right? I came here because I got out of arts and sciences because I actually believe that training young business leaders is where the heart of a healthy capitalist economy lies. Right? I actually think that business is one of the most important, if not the most important pillar, the other two being the nonprofit sector and government, of a healthy capitalist economy. And if we don't know how to train business leaders in the complexities of markets and understanding in a deep way the global economy and thinking ethically and socially responsibly, if we don't know how to do things, and if we don't do those things well, our economy will falter and the world will falter. And I think we're in some ways experiencing that right now. Right? I think part of what we're experiencing in the world today rests in some ways on the shoulders of the failure of business school education over the last 40 years. Right? So we are here. I am here because I believe in that message. I believe in that purpose. I believe in that idea. I believe in changing the world, and I believe in making the world a healthy place economically and ethically and everything else. Now, just to be clear on this, I think everybody is, I've said this enough that I think people are basically on the same team about that. But this is a big debate in business school education. Right? The 80s and 90s and even the early 2000s. I came from a school that doesn't believe that. Right? And that they're certainly not the only one. Now, they wouldn't say we want to make the world a worse place, right? But they would say that conversation doesn't belong in a business school. That belongs in a philosophy department or in the humanities or in somewhere else. But what we are here to do is to train people in how to think about shareholder value, how to think about efficiency, and how to think about how to make money in any way they can. Right?
Doug, maybe I've been listening to you too much, but that seems, it seems like a hard statement for any business school to refute, that they don't want to change the world and educate business leaders who have a positive impact on the world, which is what you said. I mean, you know, obviously the devil's in the details, but it does seem like, you know, it's sort of a universal statement
You
that
would
people.
be surprised,
Okay.
Howard. You would be
Maybe I have
very,
been
very
listening to you too.
surprised. And so, I mean, I can tell you a little bit about this story. So let me just dive into this in a minute. But this is a real issue. We are actually on a minority. Now, you're right that no dean will stand up and say we don't care about that. But it is absolutely true that the devil's in the details. Reflect on this. If everybody believes that, why is it that there's not a single business school in the top 50, besides us, that has ethics as part of the core curriculum? Why is that? I've seen the debates happen at 6 different schools that have all said, oh, well, we're all ethical, we don't need to teach ethics. Or they'll say, well, it's already all part of all the curricula that we do. Or they'll say, actually, and to your question, think about this. Nitin Noria, who I respect immensely, is the Dean of Harvard Business School. Right? I spent a year with him teaching a leadership course. He actually has done very deep things for building the leadership and corporate accountability course there, which, by the way, couldn't be called ethics there because they just don't believe that you should have ethics in the core curriculum. But they can call it something like that. And they have a good group of people there. When Nitin was appointed dean, The Economist wrote a very flattering article about him that said completely gets the global economy stuff. His whistle-stop tour of all of the Asian countries is amazing. He's doing great things. This obsession he has with ethics, though, is so strange, and it really doesn't belong in a business school curriculum. That's The Economist. The Economist magazine, in the summer of 2010, after the accounting crisis of 2000, 2001, and the economic crisis that we're sitting in right now, wrote that we think that this idea that he has of ethics is a strange obsession. Right? So, and that's Harvard Business School, right? And so, I think that you'd be totally shocked. And I'm actually happy that you think that this is shocking that we were even talking about this, but this is actually, here's another thing to reflect on. There's been an interesting movement across the country to have business school students sign something that's sort of like a Hippocratic Oath. You know that only one business school in the country has passed this, and it's Thunderbird, right? Angel Cabrera is a very visionary dean, in my opinion, and he sort of takes the attitude that I take to this. No other business school has been able to get this done. Why? Very strange question. We actually haven't even done it yet, so it's kind of an interesting thing.
But I think there are independent groups of students at schools that have signed it.
Sure.
Independent
But
of the
every
school.
time that it's come up that we should actually have all students sign this, there's pushback from industry, there's pushback from the students, there's pushback from the faculty, and everybody says these strange things like we're putting our students at risk, nobody will want to hire them. It's the most bizarre thing you can imagine. But anyway, so I think that there's a lot to actually think about here. Now I'm going to talk through some of these issues, but this is kind of just follows on this point. Why do I think business schools have failed over the last 40 years? It's because we followed the Pied Piper of neoclassical economic theory. Right now, it's easy to take potshots at economics right now, and so that's not my purpose here. But I do think that there's a very specific thing that is related to our story and what our story is opposed to, or standing opposite of, that is about what we might think of as the disembedding of business from society. Neoclassical economic theory had one very, very powerful thing that it did, which was essentially it said through market efficiency theory, you can kind of think of things that are outside of markets as externalities, right? Even governments are externalities, shocks to the system are externalities. And the consequences of that have been very, very powerful for curricula in business schools. If you think, for example, that the Stern School of Business, which is a powerful Wall Street business school, has as their core finance class financial instruments. Not corporate finance, not general finance, but financial instruments. That's the only one you have to take. What does that mean when you train students with the complexities of building complex instruments like mortgage-backed securities, when you send them out into the markets without any kind of deeper understanding of the social impact of what they're doing? You get $14 trillion of loss in market capitalization. Now, there's more to that story in terms of the cause and effect, but we educated all the Fabrice Tours out there, right? We educated those people. And so I think that there's a very, very deep issue here, and you said the devil's in the details, but those details are significant, right? They really, really matter. So any dean can pay lip service to this stuff. The question is, are you actually willing to fight through the details to actually build a business school that educates leaders the way we're talking about, right? So I think that this has been a real problem, and we are standing in a completely different direction. The language I like to use today, so if you remember what I talked about a year ago, I talked a lot about the intersection of business and public policy, the intersection of business and politics. And over the course of this last year, my language on this has changed a little bit because that seems too confining to me. It's an obvious one for Washington, but it's not deep enough in terms of what I mean. Right, so there's a very famous sociologist, you might remember, my PhD's in sociology. So one of the most widely cited and famous sociologists of this generation is a guy named Mark Granovetter. He's at Stanford. And he wrote a very, very widely cited and widely influential article in 1985 about the concept of embeddedness. And it's basically a concept that stands against neoclassical economic theory, which basically says the notion of an arm's length economic transaction that's based on rational profit maximizing principles. In other words, the idea that people can actually be disembedded from the society and the social world that they stand in and analyze as market actors is completely false. It's completely wrong. We just don't live in that kind of world. Now, to translate that into what a business school is about, to me, the most exciting way of training students, the most exciting way of thinking of business school as an institution is to fundamentally think about embeddedness. To think about how we are embedded in a society that really is deeply tied to institutions like the government, or to institutions like the nonprofit sector, or to institutions like other business organizations, and the ways in which that embeddedness has real consequences for what we do, right? So if you go back to our students who were trained with financial instruments and then sent out into the market, my argument would be you cannot give people the tools of high finance without also teaching them that they are embedded in a society and the decisions that they make have consequences. And that embeddedness is a source of empowerment, but it's also a source of responsibility. Right? So whenever I teach corporate governance, I always start with this question. I always start with the question to students, what is a corporation? People say, well, what's the purpose of a corporation? Well, it's to make money, shareholder value, stakeholders, et cetera, et cetera. But very few students actually realize the core concept, the core purpose of a corporation is to actually be able to do things in the world that you yourself would not be able to do without being protected from liability. Right? So the core concept is a legal concept, right? It's an institution that allows you to do things as an entrepreneur or as a stakeholder, a manager in an organization that you otherwise may not be able to do as an individual and still be protected from liability. Now, the reason I like to start there with students is because it gives you a sense of just how powerful these institutions are and how powerful the responsibility is that you have when you go out into that world. Right? And so I think there's a whole thing here about embeddedness that I just love. I love the idea of an embedded business school that teaches students that way. I love the idea of an embedded business school that's more embedded than a university that business schools typically are, and works deeply with the School of International Affairs and with the engineering school and with even the philosophy department. I mean, in my view, for example, the field of business ethics is quite weak as a field, and part of the reason is because it's completely divorced from all of the work that goes on in the liberal arts and in philosophy on these kinds of topics. Sustainability is the same thing. We teach a very weak version of sustainability in business schools in general, and it's because it's not embedded in the relationships that could be done in a university. So I think there's a whole concept here. There's also a concept about community engagement that's really important to me. On Tuesday of next week, we're actually going to be doing something that's called the Major Projects Lab, Ward 8, which is the culmination of 9 months of work I've been doing with the Mayor's Office and the Deputy Mayor for Economic Development Office on job creation in Washington, D.C. Most business schools don't care about these kinds of issues, about how we should be helping the world or helping the country solve its jobs problem. But if we do care about what we do, we do believe in the mission, we should care about those sorts of things. And so this is really what I think this all stands on. So if you kind of put some of these pieces together, what I'm very interested in is this intersection of business and society and the ways in which we really create an embedded business school. Now, in order to do that, we kind of have to pick some areas that really refine that concept, right? Now, note that I'm not picking functional areas. Most case statements that will be made by deans and the case statement that was made by my predecessor actually pick functional areas that really kind of thought deeply about investing in areas of excellence in the functional areas of business. I'm not that interested in those. That doesn't mean we don't need excellence in the functional areas of business, but it means that the functional areas of business should cut across all of these different substantive areas that are core to what I believe our mission has to be. So one of these is international and global. Right? If we want to be deeply in a powerful position as a business school, we need to teach our students to have a much deeper understanding of the global economy. Most business schools teach this by actually doing exchange programs or teaching kind of an abstract notion of international business. But we're building a campus in China, right? And we're going to go deep in a couple of other places so that we can actually not just be having a place where people can go and actually pushing the university to go through the relationships that get us in deep with the country. And very complex relationships, by the way. I mean, we're having to do things as a university right now that we've never done before, just because of our China initiative. But it's actually pushing us to think deeper about what international is. It's also giving us access to an entirely different group of alumni, future alumni of the university, in a very important part of the world. Sustainability and social responsibility are also very important to me and to us in general, and leadership and ethics. And probably if I had to pick where we're strongest in this, this piece is actually, we have a real leadership position in the world. This piece, we have very, very good tools and infrastructure. We have one of the largest IB departments in the country. We were just ranked 5th by U.S. News and World Report for our undergraduate IB program. I hate the rankings, but I love when they rank us high. We're actually quite good in social responsibility under the leadership of Senator Ford and the Institute of Corporate Responsibility. We're a lot weaker than we'd like to be in sustainability. But all of these things I think are important, and they also map well onto what the university's priorities are. And then you can imagine the kind of functional areas of business cutting across all of these pieces. One of the things that's also quite interesting to us, and I've only come to understand it over the course of this last year, is that from a strategic position, we are actually in a very, very advantaged, we have a great advantage that's a legacy of the past. So when I took over this school, I wouldn't say I was annoyed, but I was in some ways a little bit troubled by just how fractured and balkanized the school was. The school has 17 degree programs. Most business schools, elite business schools, have 5. Right? I've never heard of a school with 17 degree programs. It just seems strange, right? And so for me, it was somewhat of a problem because I had all of these little fiefdoms, these departments that don't think as one school. So I've been trying to convince people we have to be one school. We have to think about one school. But it's been very interesting because over the course of this summer, I've spent a lot of sleepless nights hoping, praying, wanting to assure that we're going to meet the numbers that we've predicted in our business plan. Because our business plan, remember, the subvention that we get from the university is a great gift, but it is dependent on us beating the numbers that I've promised so that we can grow by 30% over the next 5 years. If I can't beat those numbers in year 1, I'm in trouble, right? And so because the numbers kind of go on a gradual upslope in the beginning. So I've been quite nervous about that. Now, part of the problem is if you do want to manage to the rankings a little bit, you can't just grow dramatically, right? Like we have certain things that we have to be able to do in terms of career placement for our global MBA programs, in terms of the GMAT scores. All these things kind of have to fit together. But here, we've stumbled onto something that's actually brilliant for us as a strategic advantage. Because our diverse portfolio actually allows us to turn the dial on programs that aren't watched with the same scrutiny that the rankings watch a couple of key programs, right? The rankings care the most about, first and foremost, the MBA program, the core MBA program, not the part-time, but the core MBA program. Second, the BBA program. Third, the executive MBA program. And then there's a bunch of other rankings like the part-time and a whole bunch of other things, but those things we don't care about that much. When you hear that Harvard Business School is number 1, third is number 10, you're hearing the ranking of the MBA program, right? So, we, for example, have increased our revenues by about, we're probably about 8% over what we were last year in the revenues, which kind of puts us on the trajectory that I want us to be on. But we haven't touched the sizes of the MBA or the BBA program, right? And so what that allows us to do is kind of keep a very, very tightly managed ship with those programs that are being scrutinized the most, but at the same time actually move the dial in other areas. So that's actually a really, really wonderful thing that has turned out to be a very nice part of the strategic initiative. Of course, you have to be careful with diversification for diversification's sake, but I think that we're actually in a position that it's really going to be effective. Now, I just want to run through a couple of new initiatives just to update you on many of these you've heard of, but I want to tell you where we are with a bunch of them. They're kind of the things that I see as the key features of what it is that we're doing over the course of this coming year. We're in the process of writing our own strategic plan. The plan that I have that was written last year and invested in by the university, I think of that as more of a business plan because it's actually really built on resources and numbers and projections. But we still need a richly substantive-driven plan that's much more along the lines of the kinds of things that I was just talking about who we are, what we stand for, what we want to do as a university. This is actually mapping nicely onto the university's strategic plan. I've been working closely with the provost on sort of thinking through the strategy of what he's doing, and we are actually in a very nice position as a business school because the university is not only clearly invested in us and is depending on us to actually really deliver what we say we're going to deliver, but a lot of the things that are going on in terms of our off-campus move and in terms of the international initiatives, and especially in China, are really integrally related to the university's strategic plan. So it's going to be a nice thing. Executive education, distance, international off-campus, undergraduate, those are kind of the key things. And so I just want to run through a couple of these to give you a sense of where we are. I'm right now the head of the task force for the university about how to think about executive education as a university-wide function. If you've read the business plan, you'll remember that executive education is a big source of growth for us. By the way, I always like to add on to when Mitch mentions the many different ways that you can contribute to the school, and there are many, but don't forget about executive education. Remember that this is a big business for a lot of schools, and you cannot be an elite school without doing this business well. To give you some numbers, Duke CE, before the economic crisis, was doing about $100 million a year in executive education. It is the primary reason that Duke was able to move so quickly in the rankings. Their MBA program loses money. The reason? Because they buy all of their students with profits from Duke CE. Right? And you can actually move very quickly in the rankings if you give 100% scholarships to all the students with top scores. Right? It's a pretty clear, obvious process of how to do this. Right? You can't do that without resources, though. And executive education is a big source. Wharton does about $60 million a year in exec ed. INSEAD does about €100 million. Harvard is more of the $60 million range. Stanford is probably the $30 million range. Right now we're at 500,000. We're just not a player in this space. It just hasn't been here before. Now, I came from an executive education shop. I know how to build this kind of business. I also have a strategy for how we're actually going to be able to tackle this market more aggressively. But one of the things that I've been pushing the university to do is not just have us as an executive education and continue the model of having really balkanized executive education, which is what happens to almost every university, but for us to think as not only one school, but one university. If you imagine, for example, now that Siemens just moved its headquarters to Washington, D.C., we put together a package for Siemens that's about joint efforts from myself, Columbian College, and the engineering school, and then things get much more interesting in terms of what we look like to Siemens rather than each of us approaching them with our own proposals, right? And they're just one example of many of how this can really be effective. So that's actually a very exciting development. There are a lot of great trends in executive education right now. I believe that the biggest thing that is most important in executive education is customization. Many of you may have heard of our launch of a new program called the STAR EMBA program. Just to give you a little background about this, executive education tends to break down into a continuum. There's custom and non-degree exec ed, which is very, very customized. It's a lot of fun, but it's also very, very hard work. It's almost like consulting. And then there's executive MBA degree programs. Right now, we are not in a position to compete with the big boys. We cannot take on Wharton or Stern or Columbia or Harvard head-to-head in the executive MBA market, right? But usually those markets are left as just basically, the MBA plus 10 years, right? Same curriculum, same structure, very little customized about it. We believe in picking occupational niches and deeply customizing around those niches and having the only program like that program in the world. So that when someone asks the question, why are you going to GW? They say, well, they're the only program that's actually built an executive MBA for federal procurement. Right? We're in the process of building that program right now. We have great leverage as a joint program with the law school because the law school has the best program in legal program in federal contracting. Right? So it's a winner for us that's waiting to happen. Another one that we recently launched is an executive MBA program for professional athletes. The amazing statistics of football are incredible to me. 75% of these players who have careers of 3.4 years. They think they're going to have careers of 10 years, but they have careers of 3.4 years, and 75% of them are bankrupt in 5 years of retirement. Right? But there's also a large number of them that would love to have education, that would love to have an MBA degree, but they don't have the right time structure for it. And to be honest, they're a little bit nervous about just walking into a classroom with a bunch of other Wharton students. So we built this program. It took us a long time. We launched this program successfully. Dominique Dawes is one of the people in the program, but we have a number of others that are, most of their NFL players, current and Rocky McIntosh of the Redskins. And it's been a lot of fun to actually build a curriculum like this. It's hard work, but we are right now the only player in this game. There is no other player. Now, flatteringly for us, there's a number of schools that are clearly trying to mimic what we're doing, but we have such deep relationship right now with the NFL that they're not going to be able to get anywhere near us.
Look, how much scale do we need to be profitable?
Break even on programs like this is usually about 20 to 22 people, not including the startup marketing costs. Right, so this program launched with 22, so we were happy with that because we want to be around the break-even numbers. We'd like those classes to be more like at 30. You can't get much bigger than 30 to 35 because once you do that, the classroom experience starts being a lot different. However, if we do that and our margins are 8 people above break-even, but we have multiple cohorts and we have one in federal procurement and one in international business and international affairs, you start to see the numbers look pretty nice.
And what's the cost to enroll in this program?
It's the same as our World Executive MBA, so it's a $90,000 Executive MBA program.
And this is typically being underwritten by the current player or the retired player, or?
Yeah, so the NFL is a nice organization to work with because they have $15,000 a year set aside that almost no players use for education. And then, so that brings them down to around the 75, actually brings them down to around the $60,000 mark because it's over the course of 2 years. And then usually with some of these players, there's some other funding and some of them have taken out student loans and such. But yeah, some of them are just paying out of pocket outright. So anyway, but the point is there's an exciting market out there and there's a lot of opportunities for us to become leaders in those markets and we're attacking them aggressively. We're also aggressively attacking online education. I'm a big believer in the fact that in 10 years from now, the entire topography of university education is going to look much different than it does today. recent edition of the Chronicle of Higher Education had 2 articles on the cover page which were very striking. One was about the fact that the University of Nevada is very near bankruptcy, the University of Nevada system, and probably will be shut down. And if it's not shut down, it will just become a community college. And you have to start to think, in our period where there's so much struggle over the economics of so many different things, are university systems going to be supported for the medical benefits of retired persons? I'm not so sure. Right? Now, what that means is that there are very aggressive moves that are going to be happening for the universities that are going to save themselves. Another story that was on exactly the same issue was the ways in which the University of Southern New Hampshire has been able to completely transform itself and even save its face-to-face traditional operations because they have a booming online business and they're one of the people that are doing it very well. They actually hired a person from a company called Embinet to run this. Embinet is actually our new partner in executive education, or in online education. So the main point is that we have to play in this market, and we have to play at a high quality, at a high level, right? Now, it's actually interesting once you start to look into this market, because there are probably 90% of the universities that are doing online are doing it badly. And there's about 10% that are actually thinking deeply about how you have to completely transform with the different modes of delivery. Right? Now, but if you do that right, there's actually a huge opportunity to do great things here. So we're in the process. Now, thankfully, here again, I inherited a school that actually already has a lot of traction in this area. Right? We have 3 programs that have been doing online for a collective set of experiences for 27 years. Right? So 3 programs have been in the game for almost 10 years each. Now, they all each use 3 different technologies as well, which could, again, be a little bit annoying as to have a sense of what are we doing as a school. But it actually, again, provides a great opportunity for us because we can analyze which of these, in a comparative fashion, is really the best. Right? And so we have some opinions on that, and we're in the process of actually really expanding aggressively in this space. By next year, we will have launched our online MBA program. It will be a program launched with Embinet. Very modest launch in the beginning, but we would like to project 5 years from now having 1,000 students a year going through that program. Now that 1,000 students might sound a lot when you compare it to our global MBA and our BBA programs, but it looks to us like the market is quite deep for quality programs when you think about online as actually being able to include people in the international space. And so here again, there's another interesting feature of this from a diversification of portfolio. Our online healthcare MBA, for example, does not touch our global MBA in terms of how the rankings are analyzed. So you can have a bunch of these different programs that generate revenues, and you can continue to do them at high quality, but then you can actually continue to use those resources to bolster what matters the most or what's scrutinized the most. Many of you have heard us talk about our international plans. We haven't figured out all of where we're going yet. We are going very deep in China right now. I predict we will probably also go equally deep in Brazil, somewhere in the Middle East, and Sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa is probably the strangest one here, but I'm a big believer in the idea that if we really care about these things like sustainability, and sustainability isn't just renewable energy, it's things like water and food and poverty, then actually there's a very interesting business here that most business schools don't think about. They don't think about things typically like the business of the infrastructure of development, but China does. Right? And so when you start to think about the connections across these areas, you start to think about how much business opportunity there is, and then you start to think about our relationship with the Elliott School, and the fact that we have in our backyard one of the best schools in the country, if not in the world, for thinking about things like international development. You have some very interesting synergies. Brian.
There was an article in the Wall Street Journal today that said that Carnegie Mellon has just partnered with the government of Rwanda. And they're going to they got a $13 million grant from the African Development Fund to build a technology school. And they're going to, and Rwanda, their goal with Carnegie Mellon is to be the center of technology education in Africa.
That's interesting.
And they also said at the very last part is The second goal is they're going to have an MBA program in technology management. So they're already looking at the business side.
Right,
But, you know,
Wow.
$13 million grant to build a school,
Yeah.
that's going to be named Carnegie Mellon.
My guess is just in watching, I'm not an Africa expert, but of those who do know a lot about Africa in this school, my guess is that we're going to end up in Ghana on the Africa side. And there are a bunch of reasons for that. Just very quickly, China is going very well. I'm very surprised. I was pleasantly surprised that given how aggressive, I presented this to the trustees in June, right, Steve? And got their sign off. We signed a deal with Renmin University on July 8th or something like that. And we are launching a class of MSF students of about 30 in October. Right? It's unbelievable that we've been able to do it, and all credit goes to George DeBoer, who's the director of the Masters of Finance
Maybe you
program.
should have raised the price.
Maybe. Although in this case, we were really, really nervous about being able to launch because next year is going to be golden for us for this program.
But for this first year, which a lot of it's getting to know everybody, do you have any conservative estimate of what kind of profit margins?
Well, break even for that program was actually very low. It's 12 people. And so if 30, I'm not sure what the margin is going to be, but we're going to make money. We don't make money till the second year. The way the program is split is it's what we call a 1+1 program. So it looks like this, where the first year is all in China, in Suzhou, and then they do an internship in China with the hope that that will kind of prime them to return. I mean, it's one of the things that the Chinese government is very excited about, that the students won't just come over here and stay over here, but they'll actually be using their finance skills to kind of drive the learning back into the country. And then the second year is here, and most of this money comes here, and that's just easier for us to manage. So we don't actually see money till next year, but it'll be a significant amount of profit for us.
So you're opening something in Roslyn,
Let me talk to that in 1 second. So we do have a major off-campus move. And the off-campus move is a necessary part of the business plan. The complication here is that there's very, very tight control of the caps of how many students we can have in Foggy Bottom. This year, for the first time, we've been above 99% of the cap. So I think the number now, we are waiting for the 7th-week census, but the number now is something like 99.45. There's been a lot of nervousness in the provost office about what that means. Now, if we're projecting growth, where does the growth come from, right? The growth comes from us moving off campus a significant number of our programs. Now, the great thing about this, not just for us, but we've in some ways become, at least for this reason, the darlings of the university, because we are delivering for them 245 full-time equivalents for the caps. So this move actually is not just about us, but it's also a service to the university, because we basically relieved a whole lot of pressure for them on this point. Now, then the question was, what do we do? So we had an off-campus group that was analyzing this, and we were planning on going to Roslyn. The economics of Roslyn don't look so great to me. And we actually have the university has a very nice facility in Boston, and it's actually been just recently redone. If we were going to move into that space, we'd actually need to do something a little bit different in terms of what the structure of the space is. But we're going to end up somewhere in Virginia. And so there's, I think very good things are going to happen and be announced about that very soon. But it's just, there's some interesting politics behind it that kind of make it a little complicated right now.
Did you say we're going to be, what will be there, what part of the business school?
So what we're doing is we're moving the programs that are what we like to think of as self-contained programs. So the immediate programs that will be moved out there will be tourism, project management, the Masters in Project Management, and then the Masters in Information Science and Technology Management. I'm very intent on the school feeling like we all own this space. So I'd like to also do a lot of executive education out there so that it's kind of clear that this isn't just a bunch of programs kind of being sent to Siberia, but it actually is all of us really, and I think that there's a good argument for putting that stuff. But we need to move faculty out there for the whole thing to work, and so those are the 3 programs where the faculty are actually interested. Okay, very quickly, we're also about to embark on an undergraduate reform. We're probably going to shrink the undergraduate program. I think that it's just, we haven't thought deeply enough about what undergraduate education can and should be at the business school. Most business schools, there's a recent book that came out, Rethinking Undergraduate Business Education, which Stern is featured prominently in, so I actually was sort of part of the group that kind of was interviewed and worked on this because I was very close with Sally Blount when I was at Stern. So I was very close to what was being done there. But the big message of that is that liberal arts education is where it's at. And while I kind of believe that, I actually don't think that people have specified enough of that. So if you go back to my point about how bad sustainability is taught in the university education system, imagine if we were not just teaching sustainability as basically the way it's taught in most business schools is sort of strategic. It's a strategic course on how to think about your constituents that drive sustainability. But if you want to be George Coelho, who's a trustee and a private equity guy in the renewable energy space, like what you need is the technical knowledge of how to analyze deals, right? Like you need to know something about how geothermal plants are built, or you need to know something about how photovoltaic arrays are built, right? But our students don't get any of that. But if we have an undergraduate track in sustainability, and I've talked with David Dalling about putting together engineering classes for non-engineering majors in which they can actually learn some of this stuff, then the situation is quite different, right? Or think, for example, about international business. Right now, our international business major is all within the international business department. But why aren't they taking international development economics courses at the Elliott School? Right? Like, why aren't we leveraging what that power of not just brand but pedagogy is? Right? And so there's a whole bunch of these things that we can kind of do a lot better.
We've had we pulled in a lot of kids in the area through our recruiting process, and GW's turned out to be actually one of our targets. And one of the challenges that we have, which is changing a little bit lately, is that comment of the liberal arts part of the education is that a lot of the professional schools, business schools, have gone so intense on their curriculum around the technical side of it that when you get them, they can execute what I would call follow the leader type activities, but when you start thinking about critical thinking, about writing skills, about those aspects of what a little bit of at least what we went through when we were coming through business school of the first 2 years of liberal arts. That's been one of our challenges, and that we've had to go back and take these kids through those types of programs that take them through a process.
I mean, this is the irony, is that students think they're getting themselves a leg up by taking more and more technical courses. But the reality is, if you're an elite firm or an organization that's after elite students, what you're interested in is smart, interesting people who have basic functional knowledge but can think broadly and are interesting people. Now, I used to see this at Stern all the time. Kids would come to me and say, what should I double major in economics and finance? And I would say, well, what do you want to do? Well, I really want a job at Goldman Sachs. And I would say, what you really do is be smart and interesting. Core functional knowledge is fine, but broaden your horizons. Be able to talk about, go study Chinese, or do something that makes you,
your obsession with internships.
Yeah. Same thing. I agree with that completely.